I invite you to take the Bible you brought with you or one that is near you in the pew. Maybe you've got one on your phone or your tablet. And we are going to be in Micah chapter 6. Micah chapter 6. And so Micah is a small book in the Old Testament. And so it is going to be somewhere between 3/4 of the way through where you find the Gospels and halfway through where you find Psalms. So it'll be in there. Micah was known as a minor prophet, not because he wasn't important, but because his book is teeny. And so we've got major prophets because their books are big and minor prophets because their books are small. But they're all really important. And so we will be there in just a little bit. Micah chapter 6. Who could have imagined the last 4 years? A global pandemic, COVID and all the variants, the 2020 election, the January 6th attack on the Capitol, the global supply chain crisis, the Taliban returning to power, the war in Ukraine, the war in Sudan, the war in the Holy Land, seasons of United Methodist disaffiliations, incredibly painful seasons, fires, earthquakes, hurricanes Ian and Nicole in 2022, and Helene and Milton just last month. And now the 2024 election. And so everybody take a breath. Yeah. It has been wave after wave after wave after wave after wave. And so we're going to pause for a moment to walk through the emotional toll booth of all of that. What are you feeling? Where are you feeling it? That's important too. I would encourage you to be tender with one another right now, because lots of people are feeling lots of different things. Some folks are relieved at the results of the election, and some folks are not. We have a purple congregation. We have lots of folks who vote lots of different ways. Some folks are relieved because the political calls and the political texts and the political junk mail and ads hopefully have come to an end. Some folks are feeling numb. They're feeling numb because it's just been too much and it has been too long, and that's where they are. Some folks are grieving. Some are confused. Some are wondering about the future. And some folks are scared. I received a phone call the day after the election. It was early in the morning, and the person on the other end of the phone was heaving, crying. And they were afraid that they would have to hide who they were. They were scared for their friends who don't speak English very well. And they were wondering if there would be access to medical treatment if they had a problem pregnancy. Then there are folks who have gone to the place of despair. Brene Brown describes despair in this way. Despair is a claustrophobic feeling. It is the emotion that says nothing will ever change. It's different than anger or sadness or grief. Despair is twinged with hopelessness. People who subscribe to a power over leadership often weaponize despair. They count on people giving up on themselves, on their work, on each other. I am looking at people I know with suspicion. I am questioning the value of my work. I'm wondering if courage, kindness, and caring for each other simply don't matter anymore. I am desperate for someone to blame because blame is an effective way to discharge pain, and it gives us a sense of counterfeit control. She goes on. The research shows that hope is a powerful antidote to despair. What's interesting, however, is that hope is not an emotion. Hope is a cognitive behavioral process. It's about having a goal, a pathway to achieve that goal, and a sense of agency, a sense of, I can do this. Right now, the thing that is helping the most is micro-dosing hope. I have no access to big hope right now. However, I am asking myself how I can support the people around me, the people on my team, in my community. How can I make sure that in the maelstrom of my emotions, I stay committed to courage, kindness, and caring for others, regardless of the choices made by others? Doing the smallest next right thing is hard as, and she uses a expletive right there. But sometimes it's all we've got. It feels like everything is changing, and yet nothing is changing. And so, we remain committed to God, to each other and our community, to this good earth. Who we are committed to, God, others, self, the earth, has not changed. What we are committed to also has not changed. Micah chapter 6, beginning at verse 6. Micah was a prophet, so that means he was called to speak truth to power. And in Micah's time, he was speaking about the impending ruin of a nation because of greed and corruption. Micah chapter 6, beginning at verse 6. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before God with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with tens of thousands of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? What Micah was reminding us is that God remains worthy of respect and reverence. And how do I come before you? Do I come before you with armloads of animals and oil for burnt offerings? Do I come before you, O God, with the sacrifice of the flesh of my children or the flesh of my own body? And what Micah is realizing is that God is not asking for that. God is asking for a living sacrifice. God is asking for hearts and souls and minds transformed by the grace and hope of God. Verse 8, He has told you, O mortal, what is good. Good, we've heard that word. Jesus, the good shepherd, we have heard that word back in Genesis, in the creation of the world. As order is being brought out of chaos, God says over and over again, it is good, it is good, it is good. And so, what remains good? Creativity remains good, and diversity remains good, and beauty remains good, and harmony remains good. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? Have you ever asked God that question? What do you want from me? I remember about 10 years ago, I was going through a really dark time in my life. And so I did a retreat with a spiritual director. A spiritual director is kind of like a pastor for pastors, but anybody can have a spiritual director. And so I was on this retreat, and over the course of the days, we had sessions, and I would go walking in the woods and take naps. And one day, the spiritual director said, "Lisa, have you ever asked God, what do you want from me?" I said, "No." And she said, "Well, I am getting out of here, so you can do that." So she left, and I said, "What do you want from me?" And the answer was, "Accept the gift of my love." And so we look at this. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Doing justice is love in action. Loving kindness is love in action. Walking humbly with God is love of God and accepting the gift of God's love. This past week, there were texts that went out to targeted people. They went out to black middle schoolers, and they went out to black high schoolers, and they went out to black college students. And these texts named the person that they were being sent to. And in the body of that text, it told the person to report to the plantation because, you've been assigned to pick cotton. We can differ about how we're going to solve affordable housing. We can differ about how we're going to solve the national debt. But what does not change is how we call out racism and the other isms. What does not change is that we may remain steadfast in calling out threats and discrimination. What remains steadfast is that we will stand with folks who are targeted. Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." And loving our neighbor means respecting our neighbor, and loving our neighbor means having compassion for our neighbor, and loving our neighbor means protecting our neighbor. We are in a season of costly discipleship. We are in a season of responsible grace. And many of us never dreamed we would be here. We will remain steadfast in holding on to Jesus' death and resurrection. We will remain steadfast in holding on to hope and living out that hope as justice and kindness and humility. No matter what you are feeling right now, you are welcome here. I want you to hear it.